Is this on? It's not on. Can you, when you go in town, get me, I want a pastrami on rye, but hang on. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Woodruff cast. Very excited today to be meeting again with my friend and colleague, professional astrologer Jessica Murray. Jessica works out of San Francisco and she runs the popular website mothersky.com. We're going to go over several topics today. I think the first one that's on everybody's mind because you just cannot escape it, and that would be what is going on with our government. And this would include the wild array of executive orders that are popping out of Trump's office like fleas, but also the continuing mental illness and deterioration of Elon Musk. So join me now with my guest, Jessica Murray. How to dive into anything when there is
I,
such
I
a
want to talk yeah, I know it. And it's like all the stand-up comics are starting their monologues this way with that with that question, a rhetorical question of the shit, the speed, the thick and fast pace of the bullshit and the horribleness is so intense that you don't know where to start. And it reminds me of I've been watching a lot of nature documentaries. Thank you, David Attenborough. I know I'm not alone. For
yeah.
solace, I go to those YouTube videos, and when he describes how when the fish are under attack from sharks, they coalesce into a ball, and the poor shark is trying to get their dinner, but there's so much you would think, oh, there'll be even more lunch for them, but no, there's so much that they don't know how to pick up one fish out and eat it.
Excellent
And that's how
metaphor.
we feel. It's that flood the zone with shit thing that Steve Bannon always promised he was going to do. And
Right.
I didn't really get the meaning of it until now. I'm going to, you forget about, he says, don't worry about the Democrats, just flood the zone with shit. Flood the media with shit nonstop, and it'll confuse and disorient.
Yeah.
That's what's happening with these edicts in the first 2 weeks.
Well, like as he said that he saw politics as being at the outcome of media. So the media flows into politics now. And so that was the theory. But you know what? Do you remember those great Adam Curtis videos? We were
Yeah,
watching a while back.
genius.
Do
Mm-hmm.
you remember him talking about, I forget the guy's name, but Putin had brought him in about 10 years ago. This fellow, he used to be a theater director that ran something akin to Theater of the Absurd. And Putin hired him to create non-stop chaos in the
Okay,
country. Remember?
there
And
you
no
have it.
one knew. There were skinheads here, there were Christians here protesting, there was the military,
Right.
um, and the population was so discombobulated.
Yeah, it's chaos as population control, as mind
Exactly.
control. So, Putin and Bannon, well, they both read the same books, right? They're on the same page, but there's an evil genius to that conventional party politics has yet to catch up with.
Yeah,
These
right.
guys are ahead of their time in the evilest way. And it's working. I mean, and what and you and I can talk about is how to keep your sanity amid this.
Let's start on that upbeat note rather than going into Sun Pluto conjunction at the inauguration.
Well, I feel that we have to name the disease before we know how to counter it.
Yeah.
I feel very strongly in this naming thing. that, we have to call a spade with what's happening before we can do the good work like that. What's her name? Caldweller. What was her name?
Who?
Carol Caldweller from The Guardian had these wonderful tips for staying
Oh,
sane.
right. Yes.
Before we can do that, actually, naming is one of her points.
Right.
You name what's happening, which is what in his is perversely one of Trump's superpowers. Is he's got the naming thing down. Of course, he uses it like a bully in a schoolyard by having kind of an evil genius for phrases, name callings that stick with the public.
Hmm.
Democrats scored a win with Weird, but that was their only win in the name calling department. Trump had it all over them. It's amazing. It's kind of like Gemini without the wit.
Have you ever seen Donald Trump smile? I have never seen him smile or
Right.
laugh in the 12 years he's been on the radar.
No, he has this, because sometimes there's a tortured thing like this is just as on the same vein as his little dancing. It's so performative and fake that, oh,
And
it's the blood run.
Elmo has that same thing going on with his mouth. They're like giant toddlers that haven't been given their pablum. And now Trump has got everything, the Supreme Court, the House, the Senate, the executive branch, and he's still, angry and not
Yeah, well,
appreciated.
that's just, there's so the lonely little boys never loved, searching for that droplet of cool. And, Trump still searching for daddy's love. This giant maw of need.
Yeah.
The dark side of your noble sun sign, I have to say, the perversion of Cancer, being stuck in that arrested development of emotional lack of nurture. It's all over them. And, poor Zuckerberg, doesn't he look terrified? His face every time you see him?
Yes, unless he's looking at those augmented breasts. But yes.
He looked terrified then, too,
Well, as I told a friend,
even more.
that's the first time he saw a real breast or breasts that large in his life.
Breast like objects. But
Um,
it goes, I mean, that's the mammary thing, too. If you want to look at it, these guys not only are starved for mother love and paternal approval,
yeah,
but it just like arrested development is a real thing.
total. Well, and Trump's is so blatant with the Venus and Cancer conjunct Saturn.
Right.
It's such a classic earmark of having
Yeah.
deprivation, maternal
Right.
deprivation. So we were going to start
It's
on a
hard, isn't it?
positive note. I think I told you yesterday, like called my senators. I mean, taking small steps to just say, what the fuck is happening? Where is your message?
Good
Where's the
for you.
voice? And of course we're sorry, this mailbox is full.
Yeah. Well, that
Like,
says it all. Everything we're
totally.
seeing, like that incident, like that episode, is like an epitome. It's like a symbol of everything that's going on. It's like everything is turned into a metaphor, like that seating arrangement at the inauguration
Yeah,
with the high caste billionaires and the upper tiers and the peons left out in the cold. This visceral metaphor for the age that's beginning. That the inauguration was the day one, symbolically and calendrically, of a certain era. Sun Pluto thing being the signature of the cycle to come. Of course, the inauguration, as we know, is always going to have an Aquarius sun, but it's never again going to have a sun conjunct Pluto, not in our
exactly.
lifetimes.
Exactly.
So that statement, Who's got the power? Who's got the power? And there it was. I'll tell you who's got the power. Just open your eyeballs and look at that stage. So astrologically, we can see the sun is the identity, in this case, the group identity of the cycle. And Pluto's the essence. And I just thought that that visual was the essence distilled down, Trumpism distilled down to its essence. A balls out, no holds barred, no pretense anymore, oligarchical plutocracy. So in a way, it's perversely, refreshing. And this is the thing about the age we're living in. And this is why the Trumpists will say they like him, because there's no pretense anymore. He is who he is. They like that about him. And as symbol readers, I think we can appreciate the point.
But I think where there's a big gap in people's consciousness about this is the loss of the missing view of, like, I think you would call it like big or long time, because people now are like, well, the midterms are coming in 2 years and I'm like, honey, this ship has sailed. We're in, and not to sound dire or depressing, but you happen to be, and I happen to be living through an end of a particular empire. We've had the US Pluto return.
Right.
And then here we are,
there are cycles within cycles.
well,
That's the thing. It's
yes.
really hard to use astrology to simplify it down and single out one particular cycle, because they're all in unfathomably interrelated. That's why it's so hard to explain and
Yes.
translate into English what it means that you're at the end of an empire. This is a death spiral, but within that there's a Jupiter Saturn cycle, and within that there's Uranus is entering a new sign. That's a 7-year, that's a new beginning, and it's all true. It's incredibly complex.
And thank you for reminding everybody of that, because you see this over and over in astrology now. People are like, well, Pluto was in Aquarius at the American Revolution, the French Revolution, so that they lose what you just said, this intricate interweaving of all of these different cycles that
It's so much more complex than really English or even cognitive functioning can fathom.
Right.
I'm amazed that we can talk about it at all. But
Right.
what we do in like a study like this, for example, is that we grab one piece of it and try to get meaning that way. And then, depending on the time and level of interest, we grab another piece of it and fold that in. It's the only logical approach. But at the moment, we're talking about this particular moment in the death cycle of like a 250-year entity.
Right.
The collective consciousness of this nation and where we're at, and then the world. Dare I bring it in this cycle, but the age of Aquarius, which is like 26 thou. We're talking about a huge, and people don't usually think that way. People don't think long term. That's why it's our job as astrologers to remind them. I've been reminding my clients that 252 million years ago, there was an extinction called the Great Dying. I love the drama of that monster that, made this Homo sapiens dying right now probably look like peanuts. And I don't see it in terms of, oh, that's depressing, or oh, that's optimistic. It's just a fact. It's just, we need a little distance here, which looking at these long-term cycles can give us. That doesn't mean we don't have to pay attention to the real suffering. And, it doesn't mean dismissing feelings.
And to your point earlier about the MAGA set reveling in all of this and everything out in the open, as you said, There's no longer the covert or the patina of
Right.
it's just balls out. And I think in a perverse way, that is something to kind of celebrate because finally you're getting kind of
Yeah.
like the whole, 360 degrees of the picture instead of
Well, yeah. And I couldn't stand, I'm always railing against this duopolistic view that people are listening to, and the media narrative would have us believe that all politics means is Democrats and Republicans. And that's just a conjured up picture. It really doesn't have anything to do with what's really going on with power. Both of them are funded by the same billion-dollar industries.
Mhm.
The same polluters pump their sponsorship into Democratic coffers in every campaign. But the media and the popular imagination is no, it's blue versus red. And when people stay stuck in that, they lose the tethering to reality that would enable us to change what's going on.
Yes.
What happened on that stage in the inauguration wasn't that. It was, this is top versus bottom, baby. We've got the oligarchs on top and the freezing huddled masses outside, shut out in the cold. There's no left right there. There's top to bottom.
Hmm.
And you could see it. And so that's what I mean by uh, the pretense has been stripped. However, people are still going to keep talking in terms of this duopolistic staging device.
Yeah, they can't get out of it. I think the Sag Rising in the US chart loves sports teams. So
Yeah,
you
yeah,
get
teams.
the blue and the red and all of that. But it does seem to me with the inauguration chart going back to the power of that emblem that it was the time for the plutonic realm and everything that represents to, align with the sun. The
Yes,
and and then there it was, like you
yeah,
said, all up there on that podium. And I think one of the key elements has to do, and forgive me for being so sharp, as you said, Mars is on my sun today. But I think the general stupidity in the culture now is so baked
staggering.
in. It's well, like I saw something the other day on TikTok. A guy was interviewing, I don't know, like high school students, and he asked this one girl if she could name like 5 countries on the globe, and she had no clue.
Unbelievable. And like you and I are always saying, that the schools suck so bad. You can't
Hmm.
completely blame the internet, but that's a huge part of it. I mean, the ADHD of the whole information attention economy is a huge part of it. But the fact that there's no historical perspective is really making people stupider.
Right.
I mean, you've got this, I think that's the only way to understand that people would still be on half of the country would still be on the side of this grifter who even to this day is making money off of their gullibility with his, coins, his NFTs. And they're wearing t-shirts that say, I'm the president, bitch, at
Yes.
his inauguration while they're out there humiliated and not even getting to go inside with him. So you go, what makes them think they're not suckers? And the answer is this business of cultural identity. He's given them a cultural identity.
Right.
It goes way beyond rational explanation. It's like it's a reason that you were pointing out recently that these revenge fantasy movies are so popular because people feel so powerless and beaten down that they're going to watch Liam Neeson beat up bad guys, and their fantasy is that Trump is the triumphant underdog. It makes no sense, but that's the cultural identity that they're identifying with. And so,
Yeah, it's a very weird masochistic kind of distortion that is so golden for MAGA in the sense that the more something is shown as fucked up for them, that's even happening to them,
Yeah.
disenfranchising them or whatever, that's more, they love it. It's
They
like,
if they're even deeper into it, the more he suffers them, the deeper they are, because I guess it's psychological inversion that now is their moment to get vengeance on all these liberals and stuff. But the price of eggs is going up. Oh, that doesn't matter.
right.
Now is our moment. And we're sure not going to give Trump up now. I mean, Daddy's home and he's getting out his belt. And now is our point of triumph vicariously.
Well, what do you make of, I noticed Trump now is calling Elon Musk Leon, which is always a bad sign with Trump when he starts maligning someone's name. That usually shows his Gemini attention span is like drying up.
Right. But it's his way of getting power over to name
It,
something
the
like in
the
the
Gem
tribes, which won't tell you their name because then they have power over you.
exactly. And it's also a Gemini kind of spell casting,
Yes.
getting the name wrong, and it seems slight. And oh, just I forgot that, but
Remember with Kamala Harris, and he could never get her name just right. So it's the
exactly.
dog whistle. Everybody knows what he's really doing.
But does Elmo? I wonder if he knows it's a dog whistle.
Oh, I'm sure he feels it in his own weird, warped way, but who knows what he'll do with it. But yes, that's very significant.
I think so. So let's go back to your riff that you're on with the sun, Pluto, the
Sun Pluto. So, I keep the balls out thing, the obviousness. It's the mob, it's the mafia model that many observers have noticed that Trump's version of governance is the mafia model.
mhm, mhm,
That's what he understands back in the
mhm.
days when his father literally did work with the mafia to get his millions. And of course, so did young Donnie. But it really is very simple when it boils down to that. Even now that he's president again and he has enormous power at his disposal. I've written about this so much, it's almost tedious. I don't think that he has the brains or the discipline to be a good mafia boss. He's too undisciplined and ADD himself. Those guys have to have an iron fist that and a consistency that he just doesn't possess. But the point I'm making is that he's using that as his model.
Mhm.
So fealty, number one, loyalty. These
Right.
idiots that are exactly the opposite of the meritocratic qualities that he claims is his justification for trashing DEI, right? The inversion of merit that based on loyalty to him. And number two, the criteria of stuffing his cabinet, which is punishment if you don't.
Hmm.
So kiss the ring and prove your loyalty, which they're all doing, which is so nauseating. And number two, the mafia tech. I mean, Tony Soprano would be embarrassed at how crude this gestures of Trump. Remember when he said, he's going to threaten to take away the security detail
Yo.
of Fauci? Nice little security detail you got there. Be a shame if it went away. He's as subtle
Right.
as a bag of rocks. So there's those two things that describe his approach to how he's going to be president. And his throwing his weight around follows that playbook. Pluto governs the mob for a reason. We can pick the brain of that kind of power wielding, I'm saying.
Hmm.
And I think we need to stop pretending it's governance. It's not about policies. He changes like a weather vane in the wind, right? We know that.
Yo.
This business of backpedaling on the tariff thing and firing everybody and all these illegal edicts he's putting out. He doesn't really think that they're going to hold fast. That's not the issue, that he believes that that should be done.
But given all of this continual whirlwind being generated, and I agree with you, it's all distraction. And then you have to wonder in the Plutonic way, like, well, what is really getting, I mean, when he said he's taking over Gaza and they're going to put up condos,
Right,
I thought, okay, now we're starting because this is his wheelhouse. He's supposedly this great real estate maven. And
right,
I was like, oh, okay. So all the dust is up about, trans rights and protecting
right.
women and their
Keeping
bathroom.
people from seeing.
And then I think we're starting to see the tentacles move out for what the real, objectives are.
This is the guy who wasn't going to get messed up with foreign affairs, right? Now we're going to
Mm.
own Gaza the next day. So talk about contradictory. But yeah, I can see him fantasizing in his screw loose brain that he's going to put his son in law in charge of some grand resort. And the people who live there, oh, diaspora, we just move them out, get a broom
Exa-
and sweep them out.
Exactly. Except Saudi Arabia saying no fucking way. So I
No,
just
it's
I hope we're
not
not
going to happen.
pulled into some big skirmish blowout there. Um, but yes, back to the Pluto mafia thug mascots that seem to now populate the cabinet there. Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller.
Oh, the good
Uh,
news is that everybody hates these people. I mean, even the MAGA themselves, that just they make on a personal level, they make your skin crawl. And the jokes about Miller, the way he looks like a vampire. I have to say this right now, that Plutonian processes hold the seeds of their own destruction.
yeah, say more about that.
That's their game. I mean, it's the rot within the apple. There's always rot. And Pluto governs the process by which an entity that has some kind of healthy integrity always has a grain of rot. It's the planet of death, rebirth over and over and over again. So, of course, it does. Just like every baby who's born has the seeds of its own future death within it, its genetic heritage. So,
Right.
this process is just as obvious that way. We saw, I mean, what would you call them? The wags who were watching with glee, the little fractures occur in the bromance between Musk and Trump. They've been watching, just like we are, since day one, the seeds of destruction of that relationship. And the craziness of his edicts are starting to unravel in the short term, but there's going to be a longer term unraveling. There's going to be a backlash to the anti-Saturn backlash.
Mm.
I'm calling it anti-Saturn because my sense is that it started with COVID and everyone got so sick and tired of the rules and regulations and the 6 feet between people. And I don't want to wear a fucking mask. And there was just like kids, the whole population kind of rebelled against the restrictiveness of the COVID years. And I think that that's part of the anti-Saturn backlash that we're in now. But there's going to be a backlash to the backlash. There always is, as the
Yes.
mass mood swings back and forth,
Well,
trying to
let's
balance.
let's go into that because I have a sense it's another facet of Pluto, which is also, but it's also another facet of how the mafia deals with things that go awry, and that is assassination. And of course, I'm not promoting that here. This is for entertainment purposes only. Uh, but
Poetic license is allowed.
I couldn't help but think while watching. Oh, and I was really hoping you were going to be able to watch this, and we'll talk about it later. But they've remade the movie Day of the Jackal into a series. with Eddie Redmayne, this great
Redmayne.
yes.
Mhm.
But as I was watching this and in this skillful assassin going boom, boom, boom through the narrative of the show with different people coming down, I couldn't help but flash on this being up. The show's so popular, it's renewed for another season.
It's
But
hitting a nerve
it's
with the
hitting the
public.
Luigi, you know, fan
Yeah,
base. Like, and
yeah.
then sure enough, this fucking senator, forget his name, he looks like Skeletor. He's in Florida. I think his last name's Scott. I think he was the one that kind of,
Tim Scott.
yeah,
Yeah, the
he
ball.
protected this billion-dollar fraud thing with United Healthcare. So, of course, he's flipping it now. And yesterday came out and said, well, he's basically calling for the execution of Luigi, that, New York does not have a death penalty. I don't think Pennsylvania does either, where Luigi was nabbed. And so, his big stump speech now is to take this kid down, that
Yeah,
this cannot be permitted, this type of activity today. And I
they're
thought,
deeply
well,
threatening. Well,
yeah,
it's the balls out thing. In
right,
a few years ago, he would have tried to destroy Luigi and his old fan base in a different, more subtle way.
right,
Now it's just let's execute him. And in the other side too, Luigi represents the forces. We have to kill these moguls, these titans, these
right.
evil. So it's just gotten like cartoonish and stick figurish in its blatancy, but it's the same Plutonian process. The lack of subtlety, though, it will serve us in the end. At least it'll serve us symbol readers because we can say, see, Pluto governs the mafia. Look in front of you. Pluto
Well,
governs murder and homicide. Open your eyes and read the news, you know. And the
yes.
tech, Pluto goes into Aquarius, and the new Pluto, what would you call them? They're more than oligarchs.
But didn't you love what happened the other day when what's the kid's name? Sam Altman or
Yeah,
the Chat GPT, and then the Chinese released that very economical new
right.
version. And
At
then
half the price.
well, and then he after this guy stole everybody's content on the internet to feed it into his machine, he claims the Chinese stole
Yeah, yeah,
their model for
yeah,
ChatGPT.
exactly.
And I just thought these fuckers, they can't
They
even
can't
see.
get their story straight.
Well,
Well,
they're so
they believe their
deluded.
own lies. I mean, they believe their own worldview so entirely. They've got this own little entitled rich frat boy silo that they're in. So our only hope is to get through to normal people who are also very much in danger of being in a silo, but to appeal to common sense and basic decency, which we've given up on the Sam Altmans of the world and their obsessive little monofocus. They're beyond redemption, probably. We're not going to ask the powerful, in other words, to give up their power or to modify their worldview. But
What do
we
you
can
suggest?
point out to,
I'm sorry, what do you suggest people? I mean, you're a former wildcat activist, that was out in the streets and stuff during the 60s, 70s into
there's a,
the,
there's a real difference now.
so yeah.
Generationally, we could look at it astrologically and say that since these outer planet cycles have created a new world where everything is happening online instead of in three-dimensional space,
Mhm.
the whole idea of a street demonstration obviously has changed because there's no more public square. It's all digital. So that's one obvious difference. That means that if even the word activism, I mean, what does that even mean anymore? Is it collectivism now? If it's not with your body lying down in the front of a
Mhm.
bulldozer, the way Rachel Corrie did, what is it? So this is one thing that the young people are going to have to model for us geezers. We don't have history with this kind of world. And the other thing, which I always come back to, is that it depends on your own chart. I mean, I have a Jupiter and Aries in the first house. So, of course, I was going to spend my youth out in the streets. And it was
Right.
appropriate to my chart. It wouldn't have been if I had a stellium and Pisces at the nadir or something.
Right.
And
Good point.
these are considerations that's on a whole another level of discussion than probably you were introducing. But they're where I would always end up, is that you have to live through the center of your chart.
Hmm.
I was very uh, aware that a lot of the activists in not even my youth, but like protesting the Iraq bombing of Baghdad, which seems so long ago that people would really do well to remember what a disaster that was.
Hmm.
And, you know, the new oligarchs are quoting that, even Trump using the phrase shock and awe as if that in a positive vein, that people not remembering what a hideous catastrophe that was. But anyway, so
Yes.
when I was active, even that recently, about that particular war, there were comrades of mine who hadn't done their inner psycho-spiritual work on themselves. And the energy they were putting out was not constructive and healthy, even though there was activism and tireless behavioral punch. They were doing things,
But
not
what do
just
you mean
sitting
it
on.
what do you mean it wasn't healthy? Like what were they not
There
doing
were a lot
to
of them were so angry and immature
mm,
that the energy they were putting out into the world, even in the group, was negative.
hmm.
And I'm not saying, I think you have to have both. You have to be centered in yourself to have a certain amount of self awareness. I mean, doesn't it always boil down to that? Before
Yes.
whatever you do can be healthy. So it's not about, people talk about the dilemma of how to respond to a terrible time like we're in as if it was just about doing versus non-doing.
Hmm.
It isn't that simple, because doing, like I said, these immature, angry activists that I worked with, a lot of them, they were doing, but they weren't grounded in being.
Right.
So their actions often, sometimes even caused harm. That doesn't mean that passivity is the answer either. That can be just as much in denial of your own truth as activism. It depends on your chart and knowing yourself through the skill set you have.
Yeah. Good point to make for people, especially listening to this. But I sure your client flow lately has been focused on, or the questions from your clients focused on, like you and I talked in email the other day, that helplessness feeling. And then as you pointed out, well, that's really their objective, is
Yeah,
having people, not the clients, but the ruling class now. It's best to have everybody feeling helpless.
it has always been so.
Yes. Yeah.
It's always been. And it was one of the points that that wonderful writer, Carol Cadwalladr, made. I mean, one of her bullet points, do you remember, was you're not powerless. So they sure want us to think we are.
Hmm.
And so the astrologer in me would say, look in your chart if you want to find out where your power is. It's in there. Everybody has a Pluto, for one thing. Everybody has a Uranus, the planet of Prometheus, the rebel. Even if it's not your main signature, you've got one. Everybody has a Jupiter, which is the part of you that knows how to work ideals and how to imagine a better world. Everybody has that. Everybody has Neptune, which is the capacity for compassion and understanding emotionally what's going on with people who have less than you. Even if you don't act on it, you've got one. You know, it
Sure.
depends on how consciousness you are of it. So it all goes back, all roads lead to Rome with the natal chart.
What would you say the essence after all this research you've done? Because I keep trying to get, and of course it's so Neptunian, but I keep trying to get to the nut or the vibe nut of the Saturn Neptune.
Good
And
luck with that.
it's just
There's no nut. It's
whack-a-mole.
like trying to isolate a drop of water in a cup of water. But
And
one
yet
thing
here
you've
it's,
written about it that has helped me understand it is the Aries business, the
mhm,
weird take on Aries that a planet like Saturn is going to have versus an even weirder take on Aries that a planet like Neptune is going to have.
mhm.
And of course, the Neptune tenure in Aries is much longer. So it's this background melting down of what you and I have talked about as the manosphere, the masculine archetype. And then in a more specific way, you have 2.5 years of Saturn in Aries. On top of that, we were talking a minute ago about how they overlap. It's
Hmm.
impossible to just give a bullet point on something so complicated, but you understand them as these overlappings. And then a couple of times, bingo, the two are conjoined in Aries. So it crystallizes and brings to a head what each of those two long-term transits are trying to teach.
Hmm.
An example is, well, I see these figures like Trump as being, Chris Hedges' line was what our culture vomited up. They're just symbolic. They're just, by this time they're mythic figures. They're not even people anymore. It's like society in this era, in its blindness, has squeezed out this figure of Trump who's like dark Aries is the bully. So he's the perfect um, exponent, right? The epitomization of what we don't want in Aries, which Aries can be mean, as we know. I'm not talking about individuals who
I
have that
know.
as a
Yes.
sign. As a sign, and he's also, we talked before about how he represents sort of the worst of Gemini, which is this flaky, doesn't have a set position, really has no substance at all. He's just like a weather vane. So he's like the worst of Gemini and the worst of Aries in that sense. And
Hmm.
I think that in that way, he's perversely appropriate because the negative Gemini that he personifies is like the perfect, and I mean that in quotes, embodiment of the ADHD era we're in.
Yes.
His personality represents what the whole collective has as a disorder. And the Aries part that we're going to have to grapple with, we're going to have to each of us make decisions about, where we stand with, is when Saturn and Neptune move into that sign and ask us to consider this young, this top heavy masculine business, which is already coming to a head in a confrontational way with these politicians, like and Zuckerberg saying, "Bring back masculine energy," and there being one person, really only one spokesperson in that whole inauguration who spoke to the feminine, and it was that wonderful bishop who was a woman. Remember when she called for mercy?
Hmm.
And what was noteworthy is that she was so singular, like there was only one voice, and she happened to be a woman. But I mean, that's the kind of thing that you would write if you were writing a novel. You would make one lone voice standing for the feminine principle of compassion and mercy against this howling, raging, testosterone gone wrong mob. Anyway, I'm
But
talking really, I'm taking off on what you have been writing about masculinity in imbalance. And I think that the conjunction you're asking about is going to have to confront it.
it seems with all of the bluster and buildup that, generated something like the manosphere with, with Neptune going into Aries, I think that's some sort of a like crisis to the male archetype
Yes,
or the phallic expression that is
right.
associated. And then you've got Saturn there amplifying the insecurity about it, or I need to
Yes,
compensate for it.
overcompensating.
And I'm just hoping it's not like going to foment this some kind of an ideological male uh enclave or troops of guys
Right.
that are deciding that they're the new figureheads for what it is to be
Well,
male.
we already have. I read last week of some politicians said really it boils down to white men need to be in positions of leadership. Again, balls out. Everybody was thinking that, but he came out and said it.
And yes, it's exactly. Yeah, I've seen this in smatterings of things too. If you go into like right-leaning social media feeds, it's coming out more and more. Well, it's the white males need to reassert. And then you have the most pitiful white male on the planet, Mark Zuckerberg, telling people it's time for more masculinity. So do you see
But
the
he's so
twisted
masculine now with his little gold chain and his new hairdo. How
his
could we doubt it?
I said to somebody the other day, can you imagine having to perm Mark Zuckerberg's hair? You need to sign an NDA, to even do your job. Like, God. But speaking of emasculated men, and this leads me to like Elon Musk and his incredible rise to this position where he's
Meteoric.
sleeping.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is sleeping in basically the grounds of the White House now with 19 and 20-year-old teenagers unplugging all of the United States government servers.
It's
What
out of a comic book. This is
it,
the thing.
it is, and of course, MAGA loves it, as we know. Stick it to the libs. They've got it coming. Take it apart, take it
Well,
down,
yeah,
blow
but
it
I don't
up.
think they're going to love it, that part of it, for long. I think they're going to be very confused. I think the signs of their confusion, because these are kids that don't fit. You know how there's a schism basically in MAGA now between the techno, you had a certain name for it in our recent podcast, or maybe it was Chris Hedges. I get you two mixed up. The ruling, the parts of the GOP now that have devolved into the two that are going to be a schism, like earthquakes are going to come from those two plates rubbing against each other. We can already see it. MAGA's the red meat, crude and uneducated patriarch wife beater type, and then there's the young, or think they're still young with all their Botox injections. Maybe they even still look sort of young, like the tech boys who are acting like entitled frat boys still, and yet are hyper educated. And that schism there is going to be exacerbated.
Mhm. When you were talking, I was just seeing, Trump gets elected with Pluto at like 29.99 degrees of Capricorn. He gets inaugurated right when Pluto's right into
Right,
Aquarius. And
right.
you just described this schism. You've got
That's
the
it.
old Pluto Capricorners,
That's right.
and then now here's the 18-year-olds unplugging the
The
servers
18-year-olds who are
with
pre-Saturn return by definition.
yes. Yeah.
I mean, the oldest of them is 24. And so for astrologers, that's sort of proof that they haven't gone through the life experience to have acquired a certain degree of maturity. I mean, anyone would see that. You don't have to be an astrologer, but that their youth and the youthful folly that goes with it and the arrogance that goes with youth that we all know and love from our own histories, um,
Hmm.
they embody that thing, and that's the techno plutocrats versus the raw meat guys who are sitting in their easy chair I don't know what they do anymore. That's a cliche from Archie Bunker days, but the MAGA fans who voted Trump in,
Yeah.
that's going to be very interesting to watch. But the youth factor is the decisive dividing line.
Well, and then, Trump, Gemini, his missing twin. Here's Elon Musk, co-president. I think, we've got it again. Pluto Capricorn, Pluto Aquarius. They're together.
Yes.
Saw it in the inauguration chart.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so what is your hit on Elon Musk? Like how do you see? I mean, I did a thing the other day when I saw him do the Hitler salute, the Sieg Heil. I
Yeah.
I got he had slipped over the edge and it was
Right.
a mental illness now.
From an archetypal point of view, if we can zoom out from the news and what's real on that level to what makes it into the collective imagination, then we're using a different definition of realness, aren't we?
Hmm.
It's like 100 years from now, was that apocryphal or did that event really happen? It almost doesn't matter because it hit a nerve in the public imagination. It became part of the collective story. And
Yes.
his Sig Heil fits into that. It matched. Um, so he's so out of touch that if we had a different kind of DMSCR, what's the name of that big manual that the shrinks use to
Oh, right.
officially call?
The diagnostic manual, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could judge his behavior from that point of view, and it would be very telling. But we can also judge it from readers of symbols' point of view, like astrologically, like his having a sun in the 12th house, which is out of touch and not putting any judgment on it. It just is. It's just, it's hard to talk about in English without putting value judgment on it.
Hmm.
But in the purity of symbolic language, it does indicate that the identity, the solar construct, isn't really talking to the rest of the planets. This is the sun, and this is aspects to the rest of the chart aren't really there in a way. You don't really feel like that sun belongs to you.
Hmm.
It's one way to put it. And so you can have incredibly ingenious types, like people who are just immersed in some kind of collective imagination, and artists and geniuses, which could be argued that he does have bits of that. Or you could have madmen, right? Who are so out of touch that maybe they think Jesus is talking to them,
Yes.
which is sort of what's happening with these entitled little tech boys who think they're gods. But you can also have the same thing could be described with autistic people who are on the spectrum.
Hmm.
You could have people like Temple Grandin or
Great
Greta
example.
Thunberg or David Byrne, who are all on the spectrum, but we consider to be visionaries. Well, some of us do, I do,
Hmm.
whose quote unquote out of touchness has deeply immersed them into some kind of sense of collective urgency that
Hmm.
was truer than it would have been perhaps if they had been all connected in these nice social ways that we consider normal people are.
Yeah, good point.
But if a person doesn't have the, dare I say, moral maturity, spiritual self knowing, whatever you want to say, if the person doesn't have consciousness, that 12th house does not bode well.
Well, yes, and you have an echo of the sun in the 12th, because to me, Sun and Saturn are the defining, the bookends that ground us in our life path and whatnot. So with Musk's Sun in the 12th, and then that opposition from Saturn to Neptune in its chart, that's an echo, I think, of the same theme. There is
Yes,
there's not a saturnine sense of the ground or the
right.
limits. The limits. This is why he's like invaded the presidency.
He has no sense of perspective on the role his identity is supposed to play in his life, in collective life.
Hmm.
So I think the 12th houseness in a person who is unself-aware can be a sense of that they're the gift to the masses.
X, very well put. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That says it all as far as the self myth goes, his self mythologizing. I think he sees that
Mm-hmm.
as
And
a
they all do. I mean, a lot of them, they were already had that Jupiterian entitled frat boy thing going on, right?
right. But like this guy that I love, he writes on Substack. He did a post the other day. He said, why can't these billionaires just take their money and just fuck off?
I mean, just be happy,
Like,
go
do
buy an
you,
island
you
somewhere
go,
and leave us alone.
why do they have to step up and start dictating what, they're going to do for our lives, how things should be? What is that? What is that about these? Is it just the self aggrandizement and the grandiosity?
I think that, yeah, Jupiter is the, at worst, is the kind of grandiosity is a good word for it, that
Hmm.
created like the Sun Jupiter conjunction in the chart of the USA, that created a country that thought it had manifest destiny, could wipe out all of these miles of indigenous peoples and go all the way to the sea. And this is Jupiter on a personal level, is evidenced in these dudes who think that they can do that, who are using their Jupiter expansionistic impulses to be richer, bigger, cover more ground, control more territory in digital space or whatever, endlessly, and that it never has to stop. There's no Saturn.
Yeah,
Everything
no
can go up
limits.
and up and up and never go down, they think.
Yes. Well,
And
and they're
that's going to be the seeds of their destruction.
yes, and they're all in a literal way, they're all obsessed with rockets. And it really it is that unlimited like drive. So we're going to Mars. We're going to go live. Bezos wants to start mining from the moon, to get up there and start. It's so fucking. It's so Koyaanisqatsi. Remember that film from like
Yes, so
30
out of
years ago?
balance.
Oh my God.
Another way to understand it astrologically is that Jupiter governs the phase of life in everybody's life, if they live long enough, the early adulthood, where there's a cyclical logic to having a certain clump of years where you're expansionistic and you leave home and you want to see the world and learn as much as you can, and the feeling of immortality we have when we're in our 20s. So, and then you hit the Saturn return at 28 and you hit the earth with a thump and you realize, oh
Yeah.
my God, responsibility exists and blah, blah, blah. But that phase of young adulthood, which Jupiter governs, for good or ill, again, it depends on the consciousness of the person,
Hmm.
these guys are stuck in. Not to mention the toddler thing, which is a whole nother pathology. But let's just argue that the expansionism you just described is a Jupiterian frame of mind. They haven't matured psychologically enough to recognize the Saturn piece of meaning of life, where
Yes.
what are you going to do with it? Consequences here of your growth. And this early tech bro slogan of move fast and break things, it's all Jupiter and no Saturn.
But think about with Elon Musk, going back to him. I mean, it's Jupiter, which is this, expansive drive. But then it's tethered to Neptune, which is like the boundless.
Which is
So,
like the opposite of tethering.
so but you have one planet that's about expanding, and then the other's about boundless, where,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
so you can see what the problem is. And then the
Yeah.
wild card in that is Saturn in opposition to that, because Saturn, I think, is going to try to make something literal. So it's that Jupiter,
Right.
Neptune, and then I've got to find a way with my Jupiter or my Saturn
Right.
Gemini, sense of mental deficiency. I've got to make
Right.
for that
Right.
by being this unlimited.
Right.
It's
I've got to make a
it's
product that can show people how important I am. Saturn, Saturn, Saturn. And to show the world, 11th house Saturn, that I'm a big boy, that I'm an adult and I'm important. Saturn, Saturn, Saturn. But it's opposed to this endless you spreading, expanding like a balloon that doesn't have any rubber or any. It just,
exactly. To me, that's a
yeah,
high
that's right.
possibility of mental breakdown. Like, because the limits have to come in. Something, I mean,
Well, well, it's built into the transits, isn't it? I mean, for example, what's going to happen when Uranus hits that Saturn of his?
and that's
Uranus is going
coming
to
up.
ingress into Gemini.
That's
That's
coming up.
just an example.
Yeah,
He's going to be,
very soon for him that Uranus hitting that Saturn. So that'll be I'll be buying popcorn for that. Not to be mean-spirited, but Mars is on my sun today, as you said. What I'm all, here's what I recommend to clients lately is, and let's see what you think about this. I have to remind them that half of the country is celebrating now. They are very, very pigs and shit. Like, that version of happy.
yeah,
So I asked them to acknowledge that. I asked myself to remember it as well.
uh-huh,
And then try to like see things from the point of view that MAGA must be seen now. I'm just using that as a shortcut term. I don't know what
yeah,
you would
yeah, yeah.
describe, but it's like what I'm wondering what with the upcoming big transit shifts, Saturn, Aries, Neptune, Aries, Uranus, Gemini. I wonder how that's going to rock their world.
Right. I'm fascinated by that. Like I was saying a minute ago, every backlash is a backlash.
Hmm.
And the fact that they're being suckered from the stakes to the university to the every other Trump coin, Trump Bible. I mean, it's an accumulation of insults that you would expect like an outer planet transit, like these major ones you mentioned,
Hmm.
to be the pin in the balloon. I don't think it's going to be one big fall from grace or anything that obvious, but we can see that these transits have a kind of a logic to them. One builds on the other.
Yes.
There's a kind of a sequence. Even the dance that Saturn and Neptune are doing is not just one ingress, it's like four different ones that go through February of 2026 when they finally conjoin to the minute of arc. And each one is going to be a shift, like a seismic shift. In Trump's popularity, well, he can't keep this up. The tech courtiers, too, are so ego driven. They're going to bring their egoic chaos into his chaos. We can see that even without astrology, that something's going to give.
Hmm.
They see Trump as their new toy, like the robots were their toy, and the cars were their toy, and the rockets were their toy, and now this president is their toy, Musk's toy. But he sees them as his toy. And we saw the Mars opposite Mars, you've commented on that too, between the charts of Trump and Musk.
Yep.
These are all, this is all a very fluid situation. As far as Musk going off the rails, this is another huge X factor, another wild card in this. What are the MAGA folks at home with their beers and their guns and their, oh, good, now we're on top? What are they going to think of that? What do they think of the Sieg Heil? Are they a little bit embarrassed by it? Some of them are.
Mm.
Not all of them, but he's
The,
losing it.
the other thing is, it's just not the ones at home with the beer and the Archie bunker chairs. I just saw the cover of New York Magazine today, and it's all of the young, 20-year-olds celebrating,
Mm-hmm.
Mar-a-Lago.
That's a different, see, that's the two poles of his
Yes.
celebrity that we were talking about earlier. They're
Yeah.
each going to have their own bumps and reactivity.
Yeah.
I'm getting my popcorn out too. I think it's going to be fascinating. And then there's Wall Street. I mean, that's not a known either, to quote Dick Cheney or Rumsfeld, whoever gave that famous, when the AI tumbled on Wall Street in the last week of January because of that Chinese deep seek thing.
But Jessica, nobody wants this shit. Everybody I talk to,
Oh
everywhere I
no.
look, no, I'm saying nobody wants to deal with AI. Nobody, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting kind of fantasy thing for virile people, but
Sane people don't.
nobody really wants it. And then of course, all the Bitcoin and all the digital currency, all the AI, we're looking at something that is basically a phantom.
Yes.
They're, I mean, they're, ever since Nixon took the gold standard
Right.
of
I
money,
couldn't, as a tourist, I could not agree more.
we've been
It's all
living,
an illusion.
and now it's another thing pump. And, you saw it when the Chinese released Deep Sea or whatever the fuck that new app of the Chat GPT.
Yeah.
Stock market totally crashed with,
That's what I meant just now. It's so volatile because it's
yeah.
based on something that isn't real.
So doesn't Saturn Neptune's coming up? Doesn't that seem to be this a reality check into this very thing
Yes,
we're talking
reality
about?
check's the phrase for it. I was talking about it in terms of confronting that the real and the unreal have merged, and we have to get our bearings in a new way.
Hmm.
Nobody's admitting it now.
Hmm.
People are generally, it's become so normalized that, oh, if it makes money, it must be real. And oh, these little blips on my computer screen that show how much the stock has gone up must be real. That must mean I'm rich. People are sort of in denial that it's not real. But the Saturn Neptune is going to be a confrontation of that blatant paradox.
And Saturn always loses to the outer planets.
Right.
So,
Exactly. Exactly. I think it's going to be what would you call it? Not a critique of capitalism, but a new confrontation with the mechanics of this thing. I was reading Chris Hedges the other day. People who study capitalism, they talk about how old-fashioned markets have been replaced by these digital platforms that aren't markets. They're more like cloud fiefdoms,
mm, mm,
so that Amazon and Alibaba are set up with this. You know this better than anybody. You talk about it in terms of your publishing adventures. They've been replaced by these, we're all bound up, corralled in, the content producers, the artists, the writers, the intellectuals. We're all producing value for the owner of this fiefdom. It's not like old school economics. Anyway, these are just things that I think the Saturn Neptune years, the couple of years we're in this now,
mhm.
are going to be squishing into human consciousness. And you say, what will happen on the event level? Well, people are going to react all over the place in all kinds of different ways to that confrontation. That's not as important. I know, guessing how different factions of our society are going to react to it is less interesting to me than the meaning of that confrontation and how we're going to see it. We're going to pay attention to the thinkers who are calling it, like Hedges and the people you respect. There's a bunch of them out there. They're not going to disappear.
Right.
And if Bezos shuts them down and Substack gets over monetized and we get censored, they're going to find other ways. We always do.
And that's a great spot for us to end today.
Okay.
I think it is, though,
Yeah.
because it does find its way through. And that's what we're all trying to do now. Find the way,
Yeah.
follow the Tao. My God.
Yeah. Yes.
Jessica, thank you so much for coming on again. I love, love, love getting together with you.
Wonderful. I'm so
Just,
glad that you put these together. Thank you.
of course, and my readers and watchers, everybody is down for it. So we'll be in.
Really? I
Oh,
can't wait to see the edited version because I'm just all over the place. I don't know how to bound myself in a coherent way when we're doing this kind of a thing.
this is the dada of my Woodruff cast.
You do so well. Can I just tell you, whether we share it with them or not, a last note that I just loved?
What?
It was a rephrasing of Oscar Wilde. It was somebody in the Guardian said, Oscar Wilde might have said, to Sieg Heil, the way Musk did. To Sieg Heil the Magas once, Mr. Musk, may be regarded as a misfortune. To do it twice looks like carelessness. Remember, because he did it twice.
Oh, poor Elmo.
We have to laugh.
Thoughts and prayers to Elmo. Well, Jessica,
We have to talk about him more because there's so much I want to hear from you that you've researched on his psyche.
well, the other night I was sitting down with a cocktail and it everything connected and I was like, wow, this is somebody having a mental breakdown in public. And then I just got up, turned on the video and just started going into it all. Because to me, it's like it's kind of tragic. As much
Well, it
as
is.
I can't
It's
stand them.
tragicomic.
Jesus, that's got to be very painful, you know.
That's your dear, empathetic cancer talking. But
The
as a
Mars and
sculptress,
Pisces.
I think it's important that we see it that way as a
Yeah,
tragic comic Shakespearean, because that's the way we're going to keep our sanity.
I agree. And it is the combination of tragic and comic that it's that the melding.
Distance. It gives us the distance to be able to handle this insane
And
time.
it keeps it all real, Jessica, because it is comedic and it is tragic. So you
Totally.
don't like to go one way or the other.
No, it's
No.
both.
All right, we'll talk soon. God
Bless you.
bless. Goddess bless.
Bye.
Bye-bye.